So the bombing against Tehran continues with multiple videos over our United States night showing explosions and airstrikes throughout Tehran territory. You can see smoke in the distance, smoke on the left happening overnight. All from the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and their Air Force. So far, though, no strike yet from the United States. What did Donald Trump just say about this, and what do we think could happen next? Well, let's break down exactly what's going on. So Donald Trump this morning said that the Iranians are now begging to negotiate, which was sort of the intention of moving troops, well, not necessarily troops, but Air Force individuals, B-2 bombers, refueling tankers, aircraft tanks. You've got aircraft carriers moving into the region. A second one, our Nimitz class carrier group, is moving into the region. You've got a lot of assets moving into the region, which, of course, is a way of trying to encourage the Iranians to wake up and realize, crap, we've got Diego Garcia with B-2 bombers and potentially 30-pound bunker-busting bombs at the same time as we've got American refueling tankers coming over to Qatar. This isn't great because it all puts our Fordo nuclear enrichment facility at risk. Just so you can see the territory, here's the Fordo nuclear enrichment facility. Zoom out. What do you have right here? Qatar. Zoom out. And all the way over here, under the Maldives, you have Diego Garcia. Let's just throw that up on the calendar or on the map right here. There it is, Diego Garcia. And on this airstrip right here is usually where we see our B-2 bombers. Obviously, Google Maps doesn't give us live satellite footage, although that'd be pretty cool. The thesis is that B-2 bombers are just a 6-hour flight away from the Fordo nuclear facility and can get mid-air refueled from Qatar. This has potentially led to the Iranian regime reaching out to Donald Trump begging, no, please don't. But it's also leading to some concerns about the existing stockpiles around enriched uranium that Iran already has. Trump just this morning told us that he can't say whether or not he will strike Iran. After all, he sort of joked around, yeah, let me tell you what time exactly I'm going to strike. So he kind of joked with the press a little bit around, of course, how I can't tell you. However, he said, quote, Iran has a lot of trouble. They want to negotiate. They should have negotiated. Iran reached out and nothing is too late. The only thing that's too late is Jerome Powell. I said it's very late. There's a big difference between now and a week ago. I don't know how much longer it's going to go on. This has led to speculation that the airstrikes that were being ramped up last night were either potentially planned for market close, so potentially after the market closes today, since tomorrow markets are closed, and you'd kind of have a quiet 24-hour period to let the dust settle and let relaxation come in, making this next sort of 24 to 48-hour period quite critical for the potential of imminent strikes by the United States against Iran. Donald Trump says that Iran is totally defenseless. They have no air defenses whatsoever, and that his demand for unconditional surrender means that he's had it. They had bad intentions, and he says, quote, let's see what happens. At the same time, you've got China's foreign minister on a call with their Egyptian counterparts saying they're deeply worried about the situation potentially getting completely out of control. At the same time, you've got this Bloomberg interview with the chief of the director of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. They give some really interesting insights into what's going on with the Iranian stockpiles of enriched uranium. Remember, uranium itself is just a rock, but becomes problematic when you enrich it, generally through a centrifugal process where you over and over again essentially spin a gaseous mixture of uranium hexafluoride, and you separate the bomb-making components, or U-235, from U-238, which is substantially more common in uranium next to U-235, which is very, small in quantities. That said, take a look at this. Iran apparently has 902 pounds or 409 kilos of highly enriched uranium, enough highly enriched uranium to produce 10 nuclear warheads, as evidenced by the IAEA. And these canisters or cylinders of highly enriched uranium were, at least according to the IAEA, last stored at an underground enrichment facility at Esfahan. This facility has been struck numerous times by the Israeli Air Force, and these canisters need to be labeled with IAEA seals at the Esfahan facility. And this director says that they've typically been inspecting these sites on a daily basis in Iran. However, now that there are Israeli airstrikes against Iran, weapons inspections or these sort of uranium inspections have come to a halt, and Tehran has warned him that the stockpile could be moved in the event of an Israeli attack. Now nuclear sites are closed, there are no inspections going on, no normal activity can take place, and the IAEA, while they're tracking satellite movement to see if there's anything indicating the movement of this highly enriched uranium, they do say that they risk losing track of the existing inventories of highly enriched uranium that could, quote, quite quickly be further enriched to weapons grade and essentially turned into a bomb. So in other words, we've got enough highly enriched, maybe not quite enough for weapons grade, but highly enriched uranium they have enough of to produce 10 bombs. And this is according to IAEA inspectors who were conducting, quote, more than one visit a day to Iranian nuclear sites. I actually thought it was once a day. It was more than once a day. Anyway, Iran has yet to inform the agency about the special measures it planned to implement to protect its stockpile, and the IAEA is monitoring via satellites. However, again, they risk losing track. Now, here you could see this explosion of verified highly enriched uranium stockpiles. This is just what the IAEA is capable of tracking or keeping measures of. They say this is about 16 cylinders worth of highly enriched uranium. Notice a lot of this really exploded after Trump's sort of withdrawing from the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And what you ended up with was, Donald Trump's encouragement of coming up with some kind of new negotiated deal to replace the first one, kind of like the intention to appeal and replace Obamacare, although Obamacare was never appealed, and of course there were only concepts of a plan to replace it. But we never ended up getting a new deal with Iran, and this is where negotiations have recently just spilled over from negotiations functioning to negotiations not working, and not only not working, but the Ayatollah suggesting that they're not willing to negotiate at all. Now, this is different from what Donald Trump said this morning, but it's worth adding to our perspective this potential that Iran could now move this highly enriched uranium, which could fit into just 16 cylinders measuring about a yard high. So think about barrels 1 yard high, and only 16 of them. It's basically one truckload of highly enriched uranium that could potentially be moved to some other clandestine facility. IAEA inspectors have not seen any structured efforts yet to produce a nuclear weapon. However, no country in the world is enriching uranium at this level. So you kind of have this argument from the IAEA, which echoes what the National Intelligence Service is saying, that Iran doesn't appear to be building a bomb, but they're certainly enriching uranium at these crazy high levels that sort of makes you scratch your head. And this is where the IAEA says Iran has all of the pieces of the puzzle to build a bomb. Now, what's problematic about this is this lack of interest in Iran's negotiation with Donald Trump. Iran's leader stays defiant as Trump weighs war intervention. Overnight, we heard a lot of talk, especially from Israeli channels, that the United States had committed to join strikes against Iran, obviously that being a biased source, so we have to be careful with that. However, it does look like positioning from not only refueling tankers or B-2 bombers suggests that strikes are imminent. I personally believe this could go one of two ways. It's either the strikes are imminent against Fordo, or they're so imminent designed to get the Ayatollah to essentially call Donald Trump and negotiate. Now, the latest information that we have here from late last night is that the Ayatollah is rejecting Donald Trump's demands for complete capitulation and predicting irreparable damage if the United States joins Israel in bombarding his country. The Ayatollah has threatened to bomb U.S. bases in the region should America join Israel in bombarding Iran. However, this morning, Donald Trump is laying out this tone that, oh, not only did they call and want to negotiate, but they want to come to the White House and, they want to make a deal. It's a little too late. This is a lot worse of a situation than where we were last week. Now 200 people have died in Iran, at least, maybe even more. 24 people have died in Israel. And you're really in a place of crap. This situation has rapidly spiraled out of control. Now, of course, again, a lot of enthusiasm from Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is famous for sort of his optimism that, maybe there's still time. We can still make a deal. And this has led to some form of a bounce or recovery in stocks. This morning, Donald Trump started talking just about 30 minutes or so ago, which would be right around here. And you could see that leading into Powell's presser later today, there's certainly been enthusiasm in the markets recovering some of that negative 1% drop that we saw yesterday, 98 basis points to the downside. You're also seeing a little bit of a movement in the oil market suggesting, oh, okay, well, maybe it is true that the Ayatollah reached out and maybe they are willing to come to the White House and negotiate, because now you're actually seeing oil prices fall about 1.6%. A lot of this, by the way, here on the Western Blend, occurring just in the last 30 minutes. In fact, you could see that oil prices were actually rising in the opening trade as expectations were that strikes were imminent. But Donald Trump now providing this optimistic potential off-ramp to say, maybe there's still a chance to negotiate. Now, Hegseth is discussing the Iranian threat in Congress and a second day of congressional testimony today. But I think broadly what most folks are worried about today is, all right, what's the next move here from Iran? There is now a report that potentially an Iranian delegation to negotiate may have just landed in Oman. And so much like we said in yesterday's video with strikes seem to be imminent, we said unless there's some kind of rapid U-turn in negotiations, it looks like strikes are going to happen. Now, we're all of a sudden starting to see talk about an Iranian delegation for negotiation just landed in Oman, a more neutral country in the Middle East. At the same time, you're in a place of Trump saying, it's a lot worse than where we were last week, but maybe there's a chance to negotiate. All we know is Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Ultimately, the way to end this is very simple. Iran gives up their desire and processes for enriching uranium, and all of this ends very quickly. So in today's Alpha report to course members, I actually mentioned best case scenario number 1 is that the Ayatollah gives up before strikes. Now, given their dig-in before talk from Donald Trump this morning, their dig-in this morning and last night made that seem unlikely, but those odds are now rising based on an Iranian delegation landing in Iran or Oman and Donald Trump's pseudo-optimistic, there's still hope here, there's still a chance. Best case scenario number 2 is the Ayatollah gives up after very limited strikes from the United States. This doesn't force regime change. It doesn't force a replacement of the Iranian sovereignty. What it potentially does is you strike the Fordo nuclear enrichment facility. Now what you would be signaling to Iran is that, hey, we can strike deep inside of the Fordo nuclear enrichment facility with precision. And that's actually the scariest part about this, is you have to remember, just because we use precision-guided weapons to end up striking the Fordo nuclear facility, which is buried underground, you have to understand that even though we're using a 1,000-pound, a 14-ton bunker-busting bomb, you have to know that these bunker-busting bombs do not have a substantial blast radius underground. You have to actually pinpoint target the site underground. And that is substantially difficult to accomplish. So in other words, if you miss to the tune of, 10, 20 yards, 10, 20 meters even, your explosive blast radius might do absolutely nothing to the facility underground. Much of the 30,000-pound bunker-busting bomb, mind you, is just shielding in metal to actually deliver what's only a 5,000-pound warhead. Mind you, a 5,000-pound warhead is still pretty big, so I don't want to minimize by saying only. But a 5,000-pound warhead out of a 30,000-pound bomb means the vast majority of this bomb is just metal. designed to drill its way, through the very weight of itself, into and through a bunker. But you need the precision of where that bunker is, which means you almost certainly need spies on the ground in Iran pointing out, hey, either spies or informants, this is exactly the precise position of where the facility is located under these ridges. And again, if you miss by 20, 30 feet, you miss the bunker. So how do you know which of these are fake entrances, right? There are expectations that some of these access roads are fake, or that they're just tunnels that ultimately lead to 90-degree turns for the facility all the way down, which is purposefully designed to limit that, if there was an airstrike here, the blast through that tunnel wouldn't actually make it to the centrifugal rooms or potentially where they're storing highly enriched uranium, should they have moved it. This is a very, very difficult operation. And B-2 bombers are really only capable of carrying 2 of these bombs. So you deploy 2 B-2 bombers with 2 of these bombs, you got 4 bombs, you got 4 chances to hit it. But if you miss, you're coming back. The B-2 bombers can't even make it a round trip without a refueling trip. So highly dangerous operation. And very at risk of being witnessed. This is why I think it's highly likely for a strike like this to occur in the night hours so you can actually refuel at night, which presents its own risks, obviously. But you'd probably have to refuel over the Persian Gulf after coming from the Diego Garcia facility and airfield, refueling with air fueling tankers over this Persian Gulf area after they take off from Qatar. And then you conduct your strikes at night. Now, it'll be nighttime around market close in America. It'll be nighttime, around market close in America. It'll be nighttime in Iran and Israel. And we would expect that since the market is closed tomorrow, should last-minute negotiations fail today, strikes could be still imminent, but likely after the market closes. Again, market is closed entirely tomorrow. Although, hopefully, cooler heads can prevail, and we could actually convince the Ayatollah and the Iranians to move towards negotiations. We'll see. But this is obviously a very, very concerning situation. Somebody here in the chat says those 2 B-2 bombers could fly from the U.S. and back without refueling. Not when you're carrying 60,000 pounds of bombs. So go back to GPT or whatever you're using to look that up, and now ask, hey, what if I'm carrying 60,000 pounds of bombs? How much can I fly now? Can I make this round trip from Diego Garcia? You realistically need a refuel. So, keep that in mind, okay? I think as a jet pilot, I really started to learn a whole lot more about, especially in training, load. When you carry full fuel and you carry people or baggage or whatever, it really changes your not only your aerodynamics and your fuel burn, but also just frankly your range. So let's see here. Tom Cruise was such a bro. He was given hints to the Ayatollah, but the old fart was too stupid and didn't back down in time. Well, that's one way to put it. Iran needs to just chill. Yeah, I agree. Something to keep in mind is that these wars, these geopolitical issues are usually by the dips in markets. I've talked about this since last Friday when this drama started, and even CNBC was pitching it this morning. I think they've watched a few Meet Kevin videos, but you saw this in, Desert Storm, you saw this after 9/11, you saw this after Operation Iraqi Freedom. Usually geopolitical issues in the market, don't so much align. The only larger issue you could have would be some kind of regime collapse, an oil price spike to over $100 per barrel that ends up damaging consumers. This seems to be much more unlikely at this point, especially since the Ayatollah would be really smart to just give up right now. Let's see here. Somebody says jet pilot is not a designation. Well, there are type-rated jet pilots, right? So typically people, when you look at an FAA license, you'll actually have a type rating for a jet. So, for example, you could be a private pilot for, you could have your PPL, you could have your instrument rating, you could have your multi-engine endorsement, and then you could have a type rating for a jet. When you have a type rating for a jet, you are a jet pilot by definition. Okay, let's see here. Let's see here. Let's see here. What else? China is sending planes into Iran. Okay, this is I haven't heard of this. I think what you're talking about is this potential for there's some flight tracker rumors that China is certain like cargo planes may be moving into Iran. I think broadly that sort of sends a signal that there's some form of Chinese deployment. It's worth mentioning that the likelihood of Russia and China getting involved after precision strikes on Fordow, I think, is low. I think it would really take almost an Israeli occupation of Iran to get Russia and China, more likely China, to be more involved in some form of broader response. And that broader response would likely take many weeks. So I'm less concerned about that likelihood, although I am getting another update here. The Iranian mission to the United Nations just now, Iran does not negotiate under duress, shall not accept peace under duress. So this is, where you're kind of getting these tit for tats, like, okay, like where are negotiations going to go? Are people just posturing? Iranian mission to the UN, Iran shall respond to any threat with a counter threat and any action with reciprocal measures. It just doesn't sound good right now. But anyway, this gives you an update on everything that's going on with Iran right now.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.